Thanks for joining us here on What Matters This Week. This Sunday, I am joined by Tom Sullivan, the former president at UVM, now teaching several courses when it comes to political science. One of them, impeachment, constitutional principles, and political consequences. Sir, I appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lauren.
I have to ask, did this class come about because of most recent history, or was this something that you've always wanted to be a part of?
Well, it came about, I was leaving the presidency of UVM in the summer of 2019, knowing I was going to be joining the faculty full-time, but I was going to go off for the next year, which now is last year, for a visiting professorship at Cambridge University in England. And during that period of time, in consultation with the dean and the department head, we decided on what my teaching assignments would be. And it turns out that they were beginning to discuss in a serious, formal way, impeachment of President Trump. So I said, well, I can certainly teach that course or seminar, and that's how we got there. So I taught this course last fall, having had the first impeachment, of course, a year ago, January. And I was in England at the time at Cambridge University, and I missed a lot of the television coverage, but nevertheless was able to kind of keep up. And then we decided to do it again this spring, not knowing, of course, that there would be impeachment 2.0 for President Trump.
What was the interest like when it comes to students joining the class? And did it, well, I guess it couldn't have increased since January to where we are now, but how has it changed?
Well, my impression is that last fall when I taught it, starting in August, we were just talking about impeachment that was retrospective in several months before, 4, 5, 6 months before. So it was fresh in mind, but it was still past tense. And now this semester teaching it, it's real time. And so while there was great enthusiasm last semester, this semester it's kind of over the top with students' engagement and interest, because we were watching it on TV and then critiquing last night's news the next morning in the classroom.
Yeah, I was going to say homework was turning on the TV for certain with this class.
Exactly. Of course, there were reading assignments which were regarding, the actual language of the Constitution, the constitutional history, what precedents came out of earlier impeachments, what does the Constitution and law say about how we define impeachment. So all of that reading was foundational, but then to be able to turn on TV and see it live and see the managers and defense counsel interact on the same issues that we were actually reading about was quite dramatic.
So you mentioned constitutionality. Let's talk about that, because now Minority Leader Mitch McConnell voted to acquit the former president, saying our job was to defend the Constitution and respect its limits. What is your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that the Minority Leader was telling us explicitly, and I think he had many fellow Republican senators saying this as well, that they believed that the impeachment of a president now out of office during the trial was unconstitutional. In short, meaning that the Senate had no jurisdiction to proceed with the trial. And that was the reason that they were voting largely to acquit. In short, the Senate had no jurisdiction, no authority to try a president who's out of office. That notion is actually wrong on the facts and wrong on history. So for example, the United States Senate now 3 times in history has voted that they have jurisdiction to proceed with an impeachment and a trial after a particular individual, in this case, a president of the United States, and previously a cabinet member in the 1860s. So 3 times the Senate has said, when confronted with this constitutional challenge, yes, in fact, we do have jurisdiction, we can proceed. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is over 140 constitutional and legal scholars had written, and they come from very bipartisan backgrounds, both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, all said in their view it was constitutional to proceed. specifically if the impeachment had in fact started and the trial was delayed. Well, in this case, President Trump was in fact impeached while president. And by the way, that's the language in the Constitution. Impeached, that was the action of the House while he was president. And that the trial, of course, comes next. But the trial was actually postponed by the majority Republican leader at the time. So it's a little ironic to now say, too late, sorry, you don't have jurisdiction to proceed, when in fact the majority Republican leader was the one who postponed the trial. So the answer to that is it is constitutional. The Senate has said it 3 times in history, and we have historical precedent from other impeachments likewise. And I would also say that there were leading Republican lawyers, well-regarded Republican lawyers and legal scholars, who also reached the same conclusion, that it was in fact constitutional to proceed with the trial as long as the president was actually impeached while in office. He then went on, the minority leader now went on to excoriate the president very significantly about the actual behavior, if not crimes, that he thought the president had committed, almost paralleling perfectly the House manager's case against the president. So I think the minority leader was trying to kind of have it both ways, in the sense that I believe he's completely guilty, but on the other hand, I voted to acquit because I don't think the Senate has jurisdiction to consider it.
You mentioned criminality there. We've all learned, we've all been told, in the past year, that political impeachment trial is different from a criminal courtroom trial. But figuring out the nuances is almost easier said than done in some cases, right? That's
exactly right. So what we have is a very special kind of constitutional court. And the founders were very clear and explicit about how they wanted this to go. It's actually quasi-judicial because there is a trial in the Senate. It's quasi-legal in the sense that the House acts like a grand jury in indicting or charging. You have a Chief Justice under the Constitution presiding when the president is the target of the impeachment. You have very specific constitutional rules and Senate rules that guide us. So it very much has a legalistic part of it. But at the end, as we see, it is left up to the individual judgment and conscience of each House member as they're charging, or the senator as they're trying. And that is a vote or a judgment of the conscience. And so it has that political element right at the end, but it's fully outlined and structured by the Constitution itself.
I'm wondering what the reaction was like for your students when new developments came about, when we saw some of that new evidence last week from the impeachment managers. How was that interaction like with students?
Well, just for example, as we were all tuning in last Friday evening and then woke up Saturday morning to see the arguments continue, and then some evidentiary challenges when the House managers were asking for witnesses, and then the Senate went into recess for an hour or so, and then they came back with a vote, and then they came back later with a decision that was a compromise. And it was quite confusing watching it on TV. It was quite normal as a lawyer to understand what was going on there. And so the first question on class yesterday, after everybody watching the Friday and Saturday, was what on earth was going on with all of that? And it was easy to explain. So for example, on Friday night, the House managers were informed of new evidence. The Republican Congresswoman coming forward with direct evidence of a phone conversation with contemporaneous notes that she took. Of what the president did or did not do during that almost 3 hours insurrection on the Capitol grounds. So that was new, very new evidence that they wanted to get into the record. It was consistent with what they had put in earlier, but it was very much direct evidence. So they moved to have the Senate take testimony. In this case, it would have been a deposition, not live question and answer in the well of the Senate. And there was a scuffle because that was a surprise motion that the senators were not expecting. So, and the Senate tends to be very formalistic and rule bound. And so there was this time frame of trying to figure out what to do with this. They came back and, as you know, by a majority vote, decided, and this is historical too, decided to take evidence. But then as soon as they realized what they had done, the problem was, well, when and how long will this drag things on, and how many witnesses, et cetera. And the House managers simply came to them and said, look, if you stipulate that this can go into the record as it is now, what we know now through her own statements, we don't have to depose her and delay. And so the Senate, House managers, and defense counsel all agreed. So then they came back and said, all right, it's in evidence, we can proceed with the arguments as we had calendared them. That's something that happens routinely in trials, where lawyers attempt to put something in the record. After a certain amount of debate, the other side stipulates to the facts and they put it in the record, and they go on without the actual witness appearing.
I wonder how your other seminar called Presidential Leadership kind of intertwines with this impeachment course.
Well, there's very significant overlap, not originally intended, I will admit. But as it unfolds and evolves, clearly in the other course, United States Presidential Leadership, we are discussing attributes and characteristics of the presidents from Washington through President Trump, and what attributes and characteristics and values make a president successful or not. And as we go through all of that, we then discuss the Constitution, Article 2, executive powers of the president. And then, of course, we bump into impeachment. What if things go wrong? And how do we remove a president? So in the context of looking at the viability of impeachment, you have a backdrop of history here of what made certain presidents great, mediocre, or a failure. So it's a wonderful foundation, the course on U.S. presidential leadership, to really understand what's going on in impeachment and why the founders of the Constitution in 1787 were so keen on the importance of the impeachment clause. In short, Lauren, what they decided to do is they wanted to have a stronger president under Article 2, because under the Articles of Confederation before, there was no executive leadership and it was a failure. So they knew they had to have strong leadership, and they put that in Article 2. But they also knew by giving more responsibility to a president, there had to be checks and balances, there had to be accountability. And so they would not have passed the Constitution without that impeachment clause in it. So the two courses kind of join together in what we think about presidents, our ideal, and then what can happen when it goes wrong.
Tom Sullivan, appreciate you joining us as your students and the rest of us are learning all along in this new normal. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. My pleasure being with you.